In order to develop a budget and a communication strategy, it is very helpful to do a benchmark survey. When should you do one? As soon as you have finished your research and have the money. I've worked in more than 300 campaigns. The most difficult were those in which I had no data, races in which I had to second guess where my client stood with the electorate, second guess what I needed to tell the electorate about my client's background, values, issue positions, or about his or her opponent. I hate those kinds of campaigns. And you should be very suspicious of any consultant who claims to know what you need to do in the absence of any data. I compare that to a contractor who says he can build a brand new, customized $1 million home without any blueprint. No, he can't. Even if he is an experienced builder. Even if he's built other $1 million homes. The fact that you are building a customized home means he has never done one quite like yours. Well, your campaign is a customized operation. It requires a customized strategy. For no one has a biography just like yours or believes about all matters of the day exactly the same way you do. And the political environment in which you are running is like shifting sand. It changes from day to day. And the strategy that worked so well for your friend Joe in 2006 may not work at all in the year 2012. Developing a campaign strategy without hard data is like asking a surgeon to remove a brain tumor without first getting an X-ray. Before I tell you how to use a survey, let me touch upon a couple of mistakes to avoid. One, don't assume that you or your media consultant knows exactly what your strategy should be without doing a survey. If you do, you may find at the end of the day that you've blown hundreds or thousands or millions of dollars on a communication strategy that was completely flawed. And number two, do not use polls to determine what you believe or don't believe. I once asked a candidate for the United States Senate his position on abortion. He told me he didn't know because he hadn't polled it yet. I told him to find another consultant. Polls should not be used to determine your fundamental beliefs and convictions. The purpose of a poll is to test the saliency of your own ideas and how they fare in the political marketplace. Provide insight on how to introduce yourself to the electorate, what values to highlight in your advertising, issue positions to emphasize, how to disseminate your message, and how to box your opponent. Done correctly, they will give you a political roadmap between where you are on the day they are taken to where you want to be on election day. And done correctly, they will tell you the cheapest way to get there. I'm going to break this tutorial into two broad sections. What to do before you poll, and that which you do after you have the data. Before you poll. First, know the electorate you are going to poll before you poll, the party affiliation, the counties or civil subdivisions where voters live, the media markets in which they reside, the historical voting patterns of the district, the race, ethnicity, and demographics of your state or district, and who the major employers are. That way, you'll know when the poll is finished that you have sampled the electorate correctly. Here's an example. Suppose your district is 40% Republican, 30% Democrat, and the rest unaffiliated. And suppose when you have finished your poll that 90% say they are Democrats and 10% say they are Republican. If that happens, you do not have an accurate picture of the electorate. You have garbage. You want to know the items I just mentioned before you poll to ensure that your sample is correct, for if it is not, your poll will not be accurate. So if your district is 40% Republican, 30% Democrat, and the rest unaffiliated, your sample should be as well. If there are 5 counties in your district and one has 50% of the likely voters, then half the people you poll should come from that county. If you are running in a state with several different media markets, make sure that the sample you use is an accurate reflection of where people get their television news. Know the demographics of the district, the race, religion, ethnicity, gender, age, to ensure that your sample correctly reflects the district you are polling. Finally, pay attention to the historical voting patterns. In presidential years, turnout is usually heavy. In many jurisdictions, the number of people who vote in off-year elections is only half that of presidential years. Turnout patterns and the composition of the electorate in an off-year election is often very different than presidential years. I've done a lot of work in a certain city where African Americans are almost 30% of the electorate in presidential years. In off-year elections, they are usually less than 15%. If you don't know that before you poll, you'll end up oversampling or undersampling key segments of the electorate. What if you are running in a primary and not a general election? The same principles apply. In a primary, the most important question is, who gets to vote? Is it closed? By that I mean, can only party members vote? Or are independents also allowed to participate? Again, look at the historical patterns in the composition of the past primary electorate to make sure you are polling the right people. Second, before you poll, develop your rationale. Jot down why you want the job, what you'll do if you get it. When developing a questionnaire, the first question I usually ask a candidate is, if you could do only 3 things once you are elected, what 3 things would those be? If you cannot answer that question as a candidate, give more thought to why you're running. Let's talk about a hypothetical answer to that question. Suppose candidate A said he wanted to nationalize health care, cut the capital gains tax for small businesses, and build more charter schools. Fine, test it. Don't presume that the electorate is going to be for or against someone who thinks this way. You may find that voters latch on to one or more of the ideas, or you may find they don't like any of them. If that's the case, it doesn't mean you should not run. It does mean you need to highlight some other reason for running. In 1977, Ed Koch ran for mayor of New York City against Mario Cuomo in a Democratic primary. Koch wanted to impose the death penalty. Cuomo was against it. To some, it sounded bizarre that a mayor's race would be decided by an issue over which the mayor of New York has no control, for only the legislature can pass a death penalty bill. It was, however, something Koch felt strongly about. And at the time when crime was rampant in New York City, it became the issue that defined the race. Koch won. Don't just test 3 ideas. Test 15 or 20 things that you would like to do if you get the job you're asking voters to give you. Chances are at least a few will test well. Your opponent will be on the opposite side of one that does, and you'll be on your way to developing a campaign strategy that works. In the process of developing your rationale, soundbite it. By that I mean learn to state each of your issue positions or reasons for running in 1 or 2 short sentences. Why? It is very difficult to test complicated or contorted issue positions in a poll. It is also very difficult for voters to understand them. Third, develop your hypothesis and your assumptions. The purpose of a poll is to test them. Start with your bio. What parts of your biography do you think voters will find appealing? Have you accomplished anything in private or public life that you think voters will find impressive? Do you have strong feelings about issues of our time that say something about your values? Which of your values do you think voters would strongly share? Which of your issue positions do you believe voters will find most appealing? Now take a look at your opponent's bio, what he or she has accomplished and done with their time and their positions on issues of the day. When you compare your biography, your fundamental beliefs and issue positions to that of your opponent, Which contrast do you think voters will find most appealing or compelling? As you go through this exercise, you will develop some hypotheses and assumptions to test. A couple of examples. Candidate A spent his life in the private sector, grew a business, met a payroll, balanced a budget, and created new jobs. Candidate B is a trial lawyer who made millions of dollars filing lawsuits against businesses and driving several into bankruptcy. If you are candidate A, you might believe that voters would like your bio more than that of candidate B. Example 2. Candidate A served his country in the U.S. Marines, put himself through college and law school, married his high school sweetheart, raised a family, and made a fortune by going after unscrupulous businesses that sold inferior products and worthless stock to little old ladies. Candidate B inherited his father's business, has never been married, has been sued numerous times for defrauding investors, and is known to have created 3 offshore accounts to avoid paying taxes. If you are candidate A, you might be excused for believing that voters will like your bio better than candidate B. I could spend hours giving you examples, but by now you should get the picture. Compare your bio, your values, your issue positions to that of your opponent. Develop a set of assumptions about which will work best. By going through this exercise, you'll develop concrete contrast to test in your poll. When you do your poll, you'll discover which ones work and which ones don't. Other essential questions to include in your survey: your name recognition, your opponent's name recognition, what voters know about you and your opponent, what they like or don't like about you and your opponent, what issues voters find most important, and some demographic questions to ensure that the electorate was properly sampled. If you're like most candidates, you will seek the help of a professional poll taker. Before you hire one, check their references. Make sure you know what your survey is going to cost, in writing. Most poll takers will ask for a deposit. Fine, but make sure you are not required to make the final payment until the report and analysis is delivered. Insist on a copy of the crosstabs. Ask to see strategy memos they have prepared for former clients. Read them. Did they simply report numbers, or did they tell former clients what to do? There are plenty of poll takers who know how to take an accurate survey. Make sure you hire one that can also give you some insight into your communication strategy. Properly done, your survey will shed light on your communication strategy and give you a political roadmap. How you get from where you are to the place you want to be in the most efficient manner. There are 2 ways of viewing your communication strategy: the macro and the micro. But first, consider your situation. I'll give you 5 scenarios and ideas about how your campaign strategy might unfold. Scenario 1. You are a popular and well-known incumbent running against an unknown and weak opponent who has little, if any, money. You will probably not need to say much about your opponent. You'll want to remind people why they like you. Make sure they know what you have accomplished. Highlight your endorsements and otherwise keep your campaign positive. Do your homework on your opponent in case you need to fire back, but don't use ammunition simply for the sake of using it. Scenario 2. You are an incumbent defending your office at a time when your party is on the defensive, and you face an opponent that is strong on paper and has or can raise lots of money. Be prepared for trench warfare. Highlight the popular parts of your record early in the campaign. Once your opponent starts to advertise, take your shots along the way to keep your opponent off base. Use radio or mail or targeted television to highlight flaws in your opponent's bio, or to tell voters why your opponent is wrong on an important issue, or why your opponent's ideas are all wet. As your opponent starts to define himself on his terms, define him on yours, while simultaneously reminding voters the good you have done and the difference you have made during your tenure in office. Scenario 3. Neither you nor your opponent is an incumbent. Voters know little, if anything, about you or your opponent. You both have enough money to run a serious advertising campaign. Start your advertising as early as you can. If possible, use television. Introduce yourself on your terms before your opponent has a chance to define himself or you. Define the election as a referendum on an issue that works to your advantage. Tie down your end of the field first, and by that I mean secure the support of people who are most likely to vote for you. Do that before you invade what should be your opponent's turf. Try to establish an early lead and make your opponent play catch-up. When your opponent attacks, respond and kick back in a way that keeps your opponent on the defensive. Scenario 4. You are the unknown challenging a weak but well-known incumbent. You have or can raise enough money for a reasonable advertising campaign. Ultimately, you'll have to give voters a reason to fire the incumbent, but don't expect that they will do that unless you first convince them that you are an acceptable alternative. Define yourself. Highlight popular aspects of your bio and values that the incumbent can't match. Make the election a referendum on your opponent's record. If your opponent is weak because his or her party is out of flavor, wrap the sins of the party around your opponent's neck. And scenario 5. You are an unknown candidate, ill-funded, and challenging a strong and well-funded incumbent. Take a lesson from Sun Tzu, The Art of War, about how to overcome a superior force. You can't go toe-to-toe in an advertising war because you'll be overwhelmed. Wage guerrilla warfare. Use the free media to get attention. Go to your opponent's press conferences and confront him or her on something they don't want to talk about, like the people or PACs that are funding their campaign, or whether the fat cat money your opponent is getting has something to do with the way he or she voted or who got what contract. If your opponent is a well-paid public official or one who gets perks like a car, consider poking fun at the perks. If your opponent has missed a key vote, hold a press conference with someone who suffered because your opponent did not show up for work. The mission of guerrilla warfare is to turn your opponent's strength into a liability, to confuse them and throw them off their game so that you can do damage with surprise attacks. It is usually the only way to overcome a superior force. These are common scenarios. None of these apply to your situation. Elements of them will. Look at your situation and ask yourself, who is better known, better liked, and who will have the most money, so that you have a clear and realistic view of the big picture and a full understanding of your mission. Now consider your message, the macro and the micro. First, the macro. What is your overall theme or central message? Do you have a slogan that will glue all of the elements of your message together under one umbrella? Your theme or slogan should be a concise statement that clearly frames the choice that voters face, or distinguishes yourself from your opponent, or conveys your rationale. Time for a change. Change we can believe in, because we can do better. Because it's time to get our city moving again. Leadership, competence, results. A fresh face for a fresh start. Unbought, unbossed. Unafraid to speak his mind, never afraid to lead. a workhorse, not a show horse. Now the micro. There are 5 key questions your data should answer. Number 1, who are you targeting? Number 2, what are you going to tell your targeted audience? 3, what are you going to say when? 4, where are you going to say what? And 5, what tools are you going to use to communicate? Let's go through those one by one. Who are you targeting? At the get-go, decide who you are going to ignore. There are those who will never vote for you. Do not waste your precious resources trying to convince them. For example, a conservative Republican is not likely to win the votes of liberal Democrats under 40 who habitually vote in Democratic primaries. A Republican should, however, be able to easily win the votes of Republicans who habitually vote in Republican primaries. Start with a model of the electorate that you constructed before you did your survey. What percent of the electorate does each group constitute? What percent of each must you have to get to 50% plus 1? We'll call this a profile of your Election Day coalition. What percent of Republicans, Independents, and Democrats do you need to win? Of men and women? Break it down. Republican men and women, Democrat men and women, non-affiliated men and women. Now break these 6 groups down by age and race. What does your data tell you about how you fared with each group? And what parts of your bio, values, or issue positions work best among the groups that you must have? Did you see anything in your data to indicate that you have unusual appeal to a certain ethnic group, or working women, or Catholics, or Africans, or Hispanics, or urban versus suburban voters? What pockets of the electorate can you steal from your opponent that would make it difficult for your opponent to beat you? Did any of your issue positions have special appeal to a crucial segment of the electorate that your opponent must have to win? 2. What are you going to tell your targeted audience? Ask your data, that's why you did a survey, to learn the most powerful things you can say about yourself and your opponent. Do any of the groups you need to win know who you are or anything about your biography? If not, that is a good place to start. What aspects of your bio did each group find most appealing? Does the electorate know anything about your core convictions? If not, tell your story and remember that it is an essential component of your message. For if voters know nothing about you and know nothing of your core convictions, you'll never be grounded and voters will never know where you are coming from. What issue positions move the various portions of your Election Day coalition? Are independent women more receptive to your ideas on how to improve education than Republican men over 60? Does your position on taxes have a greater impact on independent men over 45 than independent women? If so, tailor your message. Finally, what bothers the electorate about your opponent? What are the negatives you tested on your opponent that voters found most troubling? 3. When are you going to say what? Timing is everything in politics. What you say will depend upon your resources, for if you do not have enough money to run an 8-week television campaign, then you'll have to compact your advertising campaign into a shorter time span. And you'll need to economize on what you say. This is a general rule of thumb. Use the early portion of your advertising campaign to ground yourself. Establish who you are and your persona. The second phase of your campaign is to establish your position on an issue or set of issues that offers the starkest contrast with your opponent. The final phase is about why you are a better choice. Usually, it is best to leave the most powerful hits on your opponent to the final phase of your campaign when voters are making up their minds. An example. In the 1982 campaign for U.S. Senate in California, Democrat Jerry Brown launched a September attack against Republican Pete Wilson on Social Security. It was the most powerful weapon that Jerry Brown had in his arsenal, and his attack ads quickly gave him a double-digit lead. However, as Wilson answered, battled back, and aired his own attack ads, he managed to tie the score in mid-October. By then, Brown had fired his best shot. The electorate had absorbed the information and moved on. Wilson went on to win a comfortable victory. Had Brown waited until mid-October to fire his best shots on Social Security, Wilson would not have had time to recover. Where are you going to say what? If you are, say, running in the state of Indiana, you may not necessarily want to run the same commercials in the Chicago market that you do in the Louisville market. Indiana voters who live in the Chicago market live in urban areas, work in steel mills, automobile plants, and are heavily unionized and very ethnic. Hoosier voters in the Louisville market live in rural areas, on farms, and in small towns. Many in that part of Indiana immigrated from the Old South, while those in the Chicago area are more recent arrivals from Europe. Culturally, the people who live in those two markets are as different as night and day. Likewise, if you are running in New York State, you would not necessarily want to run the same commercials in Buffalo that you would in New York City. Culturally, they are worlds apart. So what determines where you are going to say what? Look at your data for guidance. You may find that jobs and economic development is an overriding concern in some parts of your state or jurisdiction, while taxes and crime are the overriding issue in a different area. Some aspects of your biography may sell better in some parts of your district than others. You may find that your opponent is well known and very well liked in certain parts of your district or state and completely unknown in others. Those variables should be factored into your communication strategy. What tools are you going to use to communicate? The common tools of the trade include television, radio, mail, telephones, and your website. You can precisely target phones and mail to deliver a very specific message to a certain slice of the electorate. You can, with less precision, use radio to reach news junkies or country music fans or young people who listen to rock stations or wealthy professionals who tune into easy listening stations during the day. To some extent, you can target cable television. Conservatives watch Fox. Liberals watch MSNBC. People in the middle watch CNN. Older men watch the History Channel. The Food Channel is popular among women. To reach a broad swath of the electorate, I use commercial television. I like to use television for bio and value spots and macro issue positioning. The more tailored the message to a specific audience, the more inclined I am to use radio or mail or telephones. Put an attack ad on TV and the whole world knows you've gone negative. Do it in the mailbox or on precisely targeted radio, and the less likely it is that everyone will be talking about the nasty campaign you are running. Again, go back to your data. What does it say about who needs to hear what? What is the cheapest way to reach those people? That will determine the best communication tools to use. No two campaigns are alike. And if you remember nothing else from what I've just said, know this. Nobody talks like you, thinks quite like you, has the same experiences, or the same bio that you do, or the same rationale for running. So just because your friend Joe won a campaign in a certain way 5 years ago doesn't mean that his strategy will work for you. Properly done, a benchmark survey will provide you with a strategic blueprint, a roadmap that tells you how to get from where you are to 50% plus one on election day. Once you know how far you must travel and the terrain you will encounter, you'll be able to construct a budget required to complete your journey. A word about tracking studies. They are short surveys used to monitor the progress of your campaign, how well your communication strategy is working, and a way to monitor how events are affecting your race. In a long and complicated campaign, you will probably need several tracking studies. In fact, in some of the contests I've worked, we've done them every day over the last 60 to 90 days of a campaign. How many and how often you do them will depend on your budget and the resources you have at your disposal. My suggestion, if you are in a campaign with a budget of more than $200,000, you had best include tracking studies in your budget. I'm Jay Townsend, and thanks for listening.